This is today's News Talk. TNT.
Welcome back. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to TNT, today's News Talk. We're still in the first hour of this live broadcast. I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen, live and direct here Monday to Friday at this very time. No matter where you are in the world, I hope you can join us either on the audio or video streams here at TNT. Today's News Talk, as mentioned before the break, over to the Middle East. Now, some extreme developments. I would say probably one of the most extreme provocations may have happened over the last 24 hours, as well as an opening of a new front officially along the South Lebanon border. And this is the northern occupied Palestinian territories, the northern Israeli settlements there. That's well and officially an open front now. Fighting has intensified. Fires have raging as we speak through that area. I'm going to bring on independent journalist currently based in Calgary, Robert Inlakesh, joining us on the live link right now. Robert, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you as well, Robert. And just bring us up to date here. This is something that, you know, with all that's going on right now in Gaza, in the West Bank, and now the front, which is opened up along the South Lebanese border, really the last thing I think that people need to see is a major provocation at a holy site, especially Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem right now. But that looks like exactly what has happened. Robert, explain to us this scene and what you know so far.
Well, we know that the Israeli settlers, a settler mob, stormed Al-Aqsa Mosque, and they flew the Israeli flags inside of the masjid site. They also performed prayers and different things. It was a provocation, essentially, on what's known as Aqsa Day. The Israelis celebrate that day as, instead of being what it is to the Palestinians and to the countries of the Arab countries of the region, which was the expulsion of around 300,000 people from Palestinian lands, the occupation of East Jerusalem, the Golan Heights from Syria, and the Sinai, as well as the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. For them, it's the unification of Jerusalem Day. And so they decided to apply for permission, these settler groups, to launch a provocative march through the Old City and into Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is the third holiest site in the Islamic faith, in order to provoke the Palestinians. These are known as the Death to Arabs marches. That's their most popular chant, is Death to Arabs. They were, of course, insulting the Prophet of Islam as well, chanting, "We're going to burn down your village," and attacking Palestinian, Muslim, and Christian shop owners in the Old City and any Palestinian who passed by, under the full protection of the Israeli occupation police forces in the Old City of Jerusalem. And so it's a massive provocation, of course, and there was a lot of police presence there. And the Israeli government knew it was going to be a massive provocation. Simultaneously, as that was happening, we saw that along the Lebanese southern border, with occupied Palestine, the Israelis were bombarding targets inside of Lebanon, and the Lebanese Hezbollah were firing rockets, missiles, and drones into different Israeli military sites. And of course, the most significant development was an attack on a military facility in a location, a military site that had not been struck before by Hezbollah. The Israeli air defenses did not pick up on the batch of drones which were sent to hit that site, nor were there any sirens that blared. It was called on the Israeli side a silent attack because they weren't able to detect it, largely because Hezbollah has eliminated their defensive capabilities and their ability to detect these drones that they're launching. And we know from the Israeli reports, between 20 to 24, according to different reports, if you were to believe each one, were injured in some way, shape, or form. We've heard that around 5 are in critical condition, 2 confirmed dead of the Israeli soldiers at this military site. And of course, this has led to the Israelis a lot of warmongering from the Israelis after an entire day before that of warmongering and Netanyahu threatening an extremely strong response to Hezbollah firing rockets, which ignited fires, which really came in response for Israeli massacres on the Lebanese side. And then, of course, after Hezbollah found out, due to the environment at the time, that it could set fires by launching these rockets, the Israelis had launched their own munitions, incendiary munitions, white phosphorus, into areas on the Lebanese side to light fires there. So Hezbollah picked up the pace and ended up firing rockets, resulting in around 96 fires in total on the Israeli side, and burnt a significant amount of territory down.
And do you think there's a potential here, Robert? Obviously, Al-Aqsa Mosque being, one of the most significant holy sites in Islam, that this could spark off something like another intifada, as it has in the past. These types of provocations before the second intifada, for example, and then what would that mean in terms of, in the context of this massive conflict we're already looking at here?
Well, for there to be an intifada to take place, it's very difficult at this time. In the second intifada, when it erupted in the year 2000, the Palestinian Authority, which at that time its president was Yasser Arafat, was behind the intifada. It supported the intifada. And so at this time, that's not the case. Mahmoud Abbas of the Palestinian Authority now is completely silent. He's actually just been condemning Palestinian resistance in Gaza, and to a large extent siding with the Israelis and the Americans, despite the fact that the relationship between the Palestinian Authority and the U.S. and, of course, the Israelis as well is strained and very difficult. Mahmoud Abbas continues to do security coordination between his Palestinian Authority security forces and the Israeli occupation forces, and ensure essentially that the Palestinian population cannot rise up and do anything about their own predicament. And this is on the cusp of a potential push by the Israelis to annex the West Bank, or at least Area C of the West Bank. And so for an intifada to happen, it would take the Palestinian people of the West Bank and East Jerusalem to rise up against all odds, in the case of the West Bank, against two occupations, really. The occupation of the Palestinian Authority and the occupation of the Israelis themselves as well. So it's a very difficult predicament for the people of the West Bank to do very much at this time. We see armed groups fighting. We've seen, these sporadic protests, especially in response to things like, for instance, these provocations at Al-Aqsa Mosque. And of course, the Hamas attack, which is called Al-Aqsa Flood, was launched because of the fact that Israel was running these crazy incursions into the old city of Jerusalem, threatening the status of Al-Aqsa Mosque and allowing its settlers and its ministers to storm the site and provocatively fly the Israeli flag. And even they were trying to have animal sacrifices there in the holy site. And so, of course, this is extremely provocative to the people of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Palestinian citizens of Israel as well, and the people of Gaza and those in the diaspora. But it's a matter of what they can actually do in response to this. Hamas, perhaps it could fire rockets, but unfortunately, we haven't seen any ability of the people of the West Bank or East Jerusalem to stand up to this, despite the fact that more and more of their villages are being ethnically cleansed, their homes are being destroyed and bulldozed, and their lives are getting significantly worse in the West Bank. The unemployment rate has around doubled. The amount of people in poverty has more than doubled since the October the 7th attack by Hamas, which resulted in the Israelis then launching their war on Gaza, but also killing 500 people in the West Bank, which is often overlooked. And then across the Lebanese border, the only one really to respond to this was Hezbollah. And Hezbollah, of course, it launched its attacks today, primarily in response to what was done on the Lebanese side of the border. But it took attention away from this fascist march, which took place, which the security minister, the Israeli security minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir himself, had attended. But other than that, it was very difficult for people to mount any sort of response, especially at this time. They know there's a higher chance of them being executed in the street for protesting and for trying to put up a fight to stop this sort of provocative behavior happening. And it's interesting, we haven't yet seen this mass condemnation of these actions from the Arab and Muslim leaders around the world. There's been relative silence on it.
And also, just moving over to what's happening now in Lebanon, South Lebanon right now, Robert, it's a little bit of an escalation. Hezbollah, I think, is very much engaged right now in very heavy fighting with the Israeli forces. Israel doesn't seem to be doing very well militarily. They're now having to call up 50,000 reservists. I think they're running out of combat-ready soldiers. They're really scraping the bottom of the barrel now, attempting to, open up a full front here. What do you make of this? And I personally, Robert, I can't see the Israelis. I can't see this as a good move by Israel on its own, unless the idea is to somehow drag the United States or some other country into assisting it, or to widening this conflict. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I agree with you that they can't extract anything out of it in terms of a proper military victory, not just because of the fact that their army is tired. They've lost a lot of people in Gaza, many more than they're publicly admitting have been killed and injured there. And along the Lebanese border as well, there are so many casualties that the Israelis have hidden in the thousands of missiles and drones and rockets which have been fired towards them in the past 8 months. And so the Israeli military, of course, and its intelligence gathering capabilities and its surveillance capabilities in the north, at least, have been completely eliminated, really. I mean, they don't have the ability to actually detect many of these munitions, which Hezbollah, the more sophisticated munitions, which it fires against them. Now they're in a position where it's very tough for them. And I believe this is where the political context comes into the situation. I agree with you that without the United States, I don't think that they can actually win decisively in a war, or even attempt to win, or believe that they can win. However, I think that the Israelis are likely going for the strategic decision on their behalf, that they know at this point there is great pressure from the Biden administration and the international community in general to end its war in Gaza at Rafah. Rafah is a dead end. They said first, the Hamas bases were all in hospitals in Gaza City. They went into all these hospitals. They went into Al-Shifa after giving us these CGI videos about the alleged Hamas headquarters underneath the Shifa hospital. That turned out to be, of course, a blatant lie. Then they pivoted and they said Khan Yunis, in December, they needed to invade it, and they did. They invaded Khan Yunis, and they said that's the real Hamas base now. And then after invading just about every single area in the Gaza Strip, now they're saying that Rafah will bring them victory, which is the southernmost city in Gaza. And they know they're not going to extract a victory out of it. Hamas is still intact. Hamas still has its weapons capabilities. And not only that, Israel hasn't managed to defeat even one of the some 11 Palestinian resistance groups in Gaza, let alone Hamas. So they know they're not going to lose there, but they want to continue the war because they need to drag this out. At the end of this, loads of those officials, including Netanyahu himself, will have a lot to answer for and likely will lose their positions of power. They don't want this. And also they want to be able to finish with the image of victory. So in order to do that, with this pressure coming in for a ceasefire and for them to accept a ceasefire, at this moment, it would be opportune to pivot and to distract the population. If Israel's going to launch a war against Lebanon, unless they are absolutely insane and suicidal, it would be a limited war against Lebanon, which most likely won't really involve much of a ground maneuver, more of missile strikes and terror bombings of Lebanese cities. And so when that happens, they would anticipate, obviously, that Hezbollah would launch unprecedented missile strikes against Israeli cities in response. It's tit for tat there. If they believe they can keep it limited, then they believe that it will just be an exchange of fire, essentially. Hundreds, possibly thousands of Israelis will die. So the entire world's focus and the Israeli people will be completely fixated on Lebanon. They won't care about Gaza anymore. So even if they conclude a deal with Gaza, with Hamas, to exchange prisoners and have a ceasefire during this time, I think they believe perhaps that the Israeli people and political parties and politicians, they would accept this because of what's happening in Lebanon. If then they believe they could close that, then they could close the Lebanon front, close the Syria front as well, because that's also partially open, and close the Gaza front, and then finish by annexing a large portion of the West Bank, namely Area C of the West Bank, or portions of Area C, and run a large-scale military incursion into areas in the north of the West Bank, such as Jenin, Tulkarem, Qadqilya, Nablus, and other places there in the northern West Bank where armed groups are based. And that would be their justification, that they're going after the armed groups, but of course then they could annex territory. And so that, I believe, would be the Israeli line of thinking. That would be their only way out in this situation. But they were still obviously hesitant, because any war with Lebanon could spill over into a broader regional conflict. Also, they don't actually know what Hezbollah has prepared for them, and what they may be forced to do in retaliation, because right now, Hezbollah is literally playing with them. They're saying, okay, attack us. See what happens. Attack us. You keep killing our civilians. You keep bombing the north of our country. You attacked our capital. If you attack us and launch a war against us, we're ready for a war. Launch a war against us. And so I think they're very nervous about it, but it makes sense for them to pivot to Lebanon, close it, and with that, close Gaza, and then go to the West Bank, which is it's the weak link in the chain. It's the only area which they would be able to secure what would be on paper a decisive military victory. And so I believe that could be the strategy that they are now following, and that's the direction that they are going in.
Is not the case, though, that Israeli military facilities have been hit hard by Hezbollah? They're unveiling drone and missile technology that no one has seen them use before, and a lot of people believe, Robert, that they're only showing 20% of what they have. That there is advanced weaponry that Hezbollah has that they haven't even demonstrated yet on the battlefield, and they have a bank of targets. I think Nasrallah kind of referred to this multiple times, a bank of targets, so they know exactly from a military point of view how to disable the Israeli military, and that can be done pretty quickly if things escalate. Is there some kind of a chess match going on here, Robert? Because from Israel's point of view, I can't see how that's a good outcome.
Most certainly, and Hezbollah is winning. I think they've got them in checkmate at the moment. And so the Israelis are scrambling. They don't know what options they have. Of course, I think they are going to mount some sort of military offensive. How limited it will be, how effective it will be, we'll have to see. But like you mentioned, Hezbollah has not unveiled most of its military capabilities. It has long range. We know it has long range missile technology, precision missile technology, and it has the capacity to make whatever the equivalent of whatever Israel does on the Lebanese side. So if we see Israel blows up a city block in Beirut, Hezbollah can do that in Tel Aviv. And so now there's an equation where they have to fight a real war. They don't just get to go and bomb a territory like they do in Gaza, for instance, and mass murder 40,000 people whilst their settlers are sitting on the beach in Tel Aviv and, drinking cocktails. This will be a real war. If they want to blow up Beirut, Tel Aviv is going to be under fire as well. Haifa will be under fire as well. And not only that, if Hezbollah choose to do so, it could take the Galilee. It could cross the border with ease, seize those settlement areas, many of which have been deserted already, and they could take the territory. The problem with Hezbollah, because a lot of people say, why hasn't Hezbollah acted and done more? Well, there's two reasons, obviously. The first is that Israel still does have military power, and it can definitely mass murder civilians on the Lebanese side, destroy civilian infrastructure, and make life hell for the Lebanese civilian population. And what it can also do is it can use its nuclear weapons. And that is the wild card here. And this is why any war needs to be approached from both sides with great caution to an extent. But if Israel decides to go all in, it will be dealt a decisive military defeat. And at that point, if it ends up dragging in other countries in the region, there is a chance that Israel could use its nuclear arsenal. And that's very, very dangerous. So we don't know what exactly to expect, what the response of Hezbollah will be. But Hezbollah will crush the Israeli military on the ground. It will absolutely decimate them. They have no chance. These are the people that were fighting Daesh and Al-Qaeda for years. They've fought on the ground, tough, real fighters, not these, fighters who are given, the badge. They're called a sergeant after being 1 year, serving 1 year in the military, and have poor training and are scared of their own shadows and make basic mistakes. In the case of Gaza, if you want to look at how the Israeli military is as a fighting force, you just look at it in Gaza. And Gaza, out of all of the enemies that Israel has, the resistance groups in Gaza, although they're putting up, of course, stiff resistance, and it's a real fight there, they're the weakest of all, and they can't defeat them. They can't even defeat one of the groups, let alone Hamas. Hamas is the most powerful. They haven't defeated any of the groups in Gaza. So they will be crushed on the ground if they fight Hezbollah on the ground. But again, they know this, and I don't think they're suicidal, although I might be wrong. However, this could easily blow out of hand. You never know what will happen when missiles start flying and hundreds, thousands of people start dying on either side. You never know what is going to happen in this situation. And so other forces can get involved. What happens if the Israelis, for instance, if they want to do a ground incursion into Lebanon, they have to go through Syrian territory. They cannot do it straight for the southern Lebanon border. It's just not possible. It would be a massacre for them. So they need to do it through Syrian territory. Now you've opened up this Syrian front. So you have the armed groups in Syria. You have the Syrian Arab Army, which is there and will be operating against you. You have the Iraqi militia groups. Possibly they could be using groups from Afghanistan and from Pakistan as well. You have the IRGC, which is there. If you hit certain targets, there are Russians that are in Damascus. So, there are so many possibilities that could come out of this. Obviously, now we're talking about things which are less likely, but this could blow up into a major regional conflict and even trigger the launch of nuclear weapons. That's not as likely as the limited war scenario, which I described at the start, but it is still a possibility, which is scary. And of course, the United States is sitting back and is too petrified of upsetting their donors, these U.S. politicians, that they won't actually intervene for Israel's own good and the U.S.'s power in the region, its own good. Look at this operation in the Red Sea, which the United States has undergone with its allies. Their aircraft carrier just got hit and is put out of operation. So they've been embarrassed completely, even the U.S. and its military power and how it exhibits and asserts itself in the Middle East. And so it's been a ridiculous failure because, unfortunately, I believe in the United States, the decision makers are either in absolute disarray. They believe that everything can be done through violence. And they don't have to restrain the Israelis, that they can pull off some sort of military victory with them. And also, they're scared. They're scared of upsetting their donors. And that's from the weapons industry, the Israel lobby, all of them, because they're being defeated on all fronts here. And the money is more important than actually preserving Israel, because this could be the very end for Israel.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to add to as well. Hassan Nasrallah, Secretary General of Hezbollah, said very clearly, if the Israelis go for hitting civilians in Lebanese territory, that Hezbollah normally does not target civilians, but in this case, they will have no choice but to match a casualty for casualty in that sense. And that also, he said that Ben Gurion Airport is not off limits either if the Israelis hit Beirut airport. So that really restricts, because Israel really relies on killing civilians as one of its main kind of military strategies to kind of terrorize their opponent. But in this case, their opponent has the ability to hit back in kind. So that, in a way, neutralizes one of Israel's, normally one of their big advantages, which is that they can just, scorched earth, shoot, target anything they want. They can't do that here. That changes the game, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And it means that the Israelis will have to hesitate every time they think of destroying civilian infrastructure and bombing people inside of their homes, as they do all the time with every single war they engage in. A lot of people forget that in Lebanon, Israel invaded in 1982 and killed over 20,000 Lebanese and Palestinians, mainly civilians. Majority of them civilians. Not only that, but afterwards, when the PLO agreed, the Palestine Liberation Organization and the Palestinian fighters agreed to leave Lebanon at the time, it left the populations defenseless. And so the Israelis, supporting their Christian militia allies, like the Phalange, went into Palestinian refugee camps and mass murdered, slaughtered thousands of Palestinians and Lebanese as well.
Sabra and Shatila, the infamous massacre.
That was the worst case, and that happened after the PLO had put down their weapons and left. And that's the thing. A lot of people say, well, if Hamas just put down its weapons, if Hezbollah just put down its weapons, then Israel would have peace with everyone and turn these areas into Singapore or whatever. I mean, Tel Aviv, if you've ever been there, it doesn't look like Singapore itself, but anyway, putting that aside, they say this, but evidently from history, when the Palestinians do lay down their arms, they massacre their civilian populations anyway. And that's the thing. The Lebanese resistance now, which emerged out of the 1982 war, Hezbollah, eventually put so much pressure on the Israelis because they occupied southern Lebanon at that time, and they had a fighting force there called the South Lebanon Army as well to aid them in doing this. The Hezbollah fought them with so much vigor that by the year 2000, eventually they had to flee and abandon their occupation. And so that model there is put forth to the Palestinians and to anyone in the region who is resisting the tyranny of the Israelis, that you need to continue fighting in order to purge the occupying forces. And now Hezbollah has the capacity to do to Israeli cities what was done and what will very likely happen to Lebanese cities in the event of a war. And so they have to think twice, because every single time they massacre hundreds of civilians on the Lebanese side, there's a good chance that Hezbollah will respond by sending its missiles into Tel Aviv, and there will be an attack on Israeli civilians, because it will be a tit for tat. And so that response there will deter them to a certain extent, one would think anyway. The problem with the Palestinian resistance is that their rockets and their rocket arsenal, it doesn't have the capacity to do that. It can reach Tel Aviv for sure, but to be able to inflict these sort of attacks that Hezbollah can, it doesn't have that capacity at all. And so Israel has a free hand to massacre civilians, and then of course it claims that it's so victorious and it's doing so well militarily because it can display all of this rubble to people. It can show all of the explosions. It can show the dead bodies. And then to its own population, it can say, look how much damage we've done to them. And then on the other hand, to the Palestinians, they are bearing that themselves and losing their family members, and they themselves, it's a strategy to mass murder Palestinian civilians, and it always has been in all of the other offensives which Israel has committed against Gaza. It's always been a military strategy to murder civilians, which nobody seems to want to say, but that is their military strategy. They mass murder civilians. It's collective punishment. That's why you have a siege. That's why they prevented things like chocolate from coming into the Gaza Strip. It's collective punishment. They want to make the lives of people living hell. And so they do this. In the case of Lebanon, good luck for them doing that, because Hezbollah will respond in an unprecedented way. And Hezbollah actually is a real military. It's fully armed and it's fully capable of fighting back in kind. If the Israelis want to go and commit civilian massacres, get ready for Tel Aviv to have precision missiles hit it. That's what they need to be ready for.
And well-trained, well-equipped, 100,000 strong, and probably tens of thousands dying to volunteer at this point after what they've seen over the last 8 months. We've got some footage here before we break, Robert. This is up at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Let's go ahead and roll this real quick. We have a clip of the settlers storming Al-Aqsa. So this is one of many scenes that we've seen. Not everything was caught on video. We just have some video from the entrance area. But yeah, if this is continuing, we might have more problems by the time we hit the weekend, Robert. So it's really, I guess, up to the Israeli authorities to put a clamp on that. The question is, will they in this current environment? It's just debatable at this point. Your final thoughts, and we're going to go to break in a minute, Robert.
I think we're in a very dangerous time right now. The Israelis do think that they need to shift focus, and also they need to respond. They're under tremendous pressure after the fires which were ignited, and now this military operation which they couldn't hide the results of by Hezbollah with these drone attacks. And so I believe the Israelis will have to do something. They're being forced to do something at this point. But Hezbollah is waiting for them and is ready for them. And we're going to have to wait and see how this escalates and what actually happens, and just hope that the Israelis are not suicidal in this case, and we don't see this escalate into a broader regional war, and it can be limited, a limited war with Lebanon, which no doubt will inflict great harm on Israel, from which I believe they will pivot to the West Bank and West Bank annexation. That will be their next tactic in order to close off and claim a victory. That's where I think we're going.
Oh, yeah. Desperate to claim a victory after all of this. That's going to be the big reveal. I think you're probably right, though, Robert. This is where the focus is eventually going to go. I don't see any victory for the IDF against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. I see only problems and more empty settlements along that border, and they ain't coming back. From what we've heard and the reports we've seen, those settlers aren't coming back, not anytime soon, if ever. So that's a game changer in itself. Robert Inlakesh, independent journalist based in Canada. Really appreciate you joining us for this analysis.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
There he goes, ladies and gentlemen. Again, follow Robert on X, Twitter. We'll drop his address on @21Wired, or show post there. Just click on that. Make sure you're following Robert. He's got really good updates, up-to-the-minute information, keeping you current on this conflict. Let's take a very quick break here with the network, and when we come back, we'll close it out with more top stories just before the top of the hour. I'm Patrick Henningsen. Stay there.